every other month event that we try to get all of you really smart people together and share some knowledge that we hope you find helpful. I'm very excited about today's topic. Our prep call for this was really engaging and exciting, and I think you're going to learn some wonderful things from our panel. A couple of housekeeping items. This is being recorded, and we will send the link out to everyone afterwards. So if you miss something, have to step away to take a call, experience any other technical difficulties.
I had it on the one that it wasn't live. It was a rewatch one. That one worked, but the two that I had that were live, I couldn't get to work.
Okay, Julie, you went back off of mute. If you guys could stay on mute, we'd appreciate it. So you'll be able to go back and this presentation if you want to share with someone else. And I have a feeling you're going to find that this one is worth sharing with others. So we're looking forward to that. We will be taking questions in the chat. I'll be monitoring that and interjecting as appropriate with the panel and or at the end. If for some reason we miss your question and don't get to it, please don't hesitate to reach out to me, tracy@thecircuit.net, and we will make every effort to get that resolved. Our next event will be December 9th. We're working on a pretty exciting topic, so keep your eyes out for the updates on that one, and we look forward to seeing all of you and your associates in December as we come to close out the year. With that, I'd like to introduce Steve Bernicke. He is with Centric Consulting. They have been our generous sponsors for this series for the entire year and have rolled with the punches as we've had to make the changes like so many others. So we're really happy to have Steve. He'll be doing the majority of moderation with our panel today. So Steve, I'm going to turn it over to you. I'm going to go on mute and start monitoring the chat, and we'll go from there.
Thanks, Tracy. Actually, you did such a great job introducing myself. I'm not sure I need to do much more. So as she mentioned, it's Steve Bernicke. I help lead our Cincinnati, Dayton, and Louisville practice with Centric, and it's always a pleasure to sponsor these events, but also to moderate them. It's a great learning opportunity. We've got a great panel with Jen, Rick, and Jeff. So looking forward to the next hour and a half of content, and it should be enjoyable for all. So we're actually going to jump right in to it and let each of the panelists introduce themselves and just talk briefly about their perspective on digital transformation. And so, Jen, since you're to the right of me on the screen, I'm actually going to let you start off introducing yourself and kind of providing a little bit of your thoughts on the topic of digital transformation.
Great. Thanks, Steve. I don't know if that's a result of logging in early, so maybe a future note to self, not to be too prompt. So thank you, though. My name is Jen Dabbelt. I'm currently a group product manager with Kroger Technology and Digital. Excited to be with you all this afternoon discussing digital transformation. My early career was actually in manufacturing, quite opposite from the digital space. Worked with dry ice, so dry ice manufacturing and cleaning, which was a world I didn't know existed before I got there, but quickly transitioned into the digital realm, taking on roles in startups and moving into pharmaceutical, most recently with Kroger. I've been with Kroger just over 2.5 years. And when I started with Kroger, I was actually a program manager for our large architectural initiatives in digital, and got the privilege of working with our teams as we really solved big problems around our digital transformation, thinking about how we could really architect ourselves in a way that was suitable for a growing e-commerce business. So very excited for today's discussion, and I have the privilege of having worked with Jeff Hock, another panel member as well. So I think we'll get some interesting discussion on the perspectives there.
Sounds like she just passed it to you, Jeff.
Yeah, sure, that sounds good. So just give you a little background on myself. When I was thinking about my bio and what I've done, actually, almost all my career has been in digital transformation, even really before I think we called it that. Starting at P&G in the late 90s with an e-commerce initiative. It's kind of funny, back then, a couple anecdotes that, pull us back to how long ago that was. This thing called Google was fairly new, and we were trying to figure out how to work with that. And then the big tech debt concern back then was a thing called Y2K. So those topics, I'm realizing have kind of been ever present in my career. Like Jen, I spent a good amount of time at Kroger. I was actually at Kroger for over 10 years, 7 years in their digital team. I joined Kroger Digital when it was about 50 people or so. I don't want to say, stuck in a basement somewhere, but we were stuck in a windowless room that had previously housed servers. So kind of a skunk works. And then I had progressive roles in digital products management there. Kroger, when I left, it was, 800 plus, Kroger Digital, 800 people plus strong. And I'm sure they've expanded since then. And now I'm at First Financial, taking on another, First Financial Bank, taking on another digital transformation effort. You may find me slip and refer to as bank transformation. We made an intentional choice of not calling it digital transformation, just because of the realization there are so many other areas that need to transform as well. It's really a whole business transformation. So looking forward to chatting today.
Thanks, Jeff. Rick.
Hey everybody, Rick Huff, currently the CIO at Paycor. Part of that, I was the CIO with Access Financial, and part of that, I was about 20 years at GE, Aviation, GE Energy, GE Corporate. So various roles through my career, from SAP implementations to standing up customer portals to digitizing processes, as we called the phrase back in GE, back in my Six Sigma quality days. So like many of the other panelists have been doing some form of what I would call digital transformation probably for our entire career. It's just the phrase we're choosing to use or call it today. But I think at the end of the day, it's really just about how do you take steps out of a process, or how do you monetize what you may be doing something manually today. How do you use a digital technology or a software technology to help you do that maybe better or more efficiently? So that's kind of the 50,000 foot view of my answer on that question. I'll look forward to getting into the dialogue with you guys though about it for sure.
Yeah, one of the things we'd like to kind of jump in, a lot of individuals and folks will throw the word digital transformation out, and it means a lot of things to a lot of different people. What we'd like to do is just get your perspective of what does digital transformation mean, not just for you, but also for your organization today. Jeff, you want to start?
Yeah. So I kind of hinted at it. We're calling it bank transformation, although we will slip and call it digital, because it certainly has a huge central digital connection. I think for us, it truly is a transformation of the business. With COVID, we were already heading this direction and thinking this way, but when your primary touch point with your customers completely shut down, and our branches were shut for a while in a drive-through only mode, your digital presence becomes that much more important. So digital transformation certainly means to me, rethinking of the processes and services that we've had in place for, in some cases, well over 100 years. It's about disrupting your business before others do. That was a lesson I think that that really came to life at Kroger for me. There's no shortage between Amazon, Instacart, and others of outsiders trying to reinvent your business, and so you've got to do that yourself. And then for us, this digital transformation is about how do we. Digital is not replacing what we do as a bank. It's a lot about how do we complement the strengths of our bank, right? So we've talked a lot about taking some services that need to happen face to face and digitizing those, but we're very mindful of also not losing that human connection. We don't want to just become just a digital bank. That's not who we are, and that's not how we're going to win. So it's all of those things.
Rick.
Yeah, I would probably second a lot of what Jess said. I'll just give you maybe an example. in the previous role, it was a financial services company. We had branches, we had customers coming in and out of the door, and it was a very physical process. We'd gather documents, they'd have to bring documents in, when they were applying for loans. If they forgot the documents, they'd have to turn around and leave, right? It's a pretty laborious process that required a lot of human-to-human interaction. So one of the things we did was very simply was allow the ability for that person to upload those documents before coming into the branch, or while even in the branch, through their mobile phone, right? So we took the process that was bring something physical, come to the branch, we'll take that physical document from you, we'll start to use that as a credit checks and all those things, and we turn that into a digital process, which is, hey, take a picture of your pay stub, upload it to this screen on your mobile phone, we'll get it in the branch. You can even select a branch you're coming to. So that document was ready and viewable by us before the customer even showed up. So that's an example I would use as a digital transformation of a process. Today at Paycor, we're a software as a service company. So one of the things that we're trying to do is how do we make the operations call center more efficient from a client's perspective? Like something goes wrong or they have a question about a service we provide, they call the call center. Well, as you guys probably deal with today in your own, commercial activities, the last thing you probably want to do is pick up the phone and call somebody. So how do we make that digital? How do we make that so more seamless for the customers? Maybe logging into a portal, they're using a frequently asked questions tool, they're using various digital products that we aren't necessarily selling, but we are offering to them as a way to get service. So those would be examples of what we are doing from a digital transformation. What is now a manual, pick up the phone and call me, and we have a conversation. How do we take some of that and turn that into a service that maybe you can prescribe to or get yourself without ever even having to interact with us?
Jen?
Yeah, Rick, I think that's a really interesting perspective, and Jeff hit on elements of the in-person interactions as well. I think for Kroger being a 120-plus-year-old grocery business, our assets really are in our stores. And so thinking through that model in terms of digital transformation, we don't want to lose those interactions. We don't want to lose the face-to-face with our customers. We want to use digital transformation to help enhance those interactions and really expand our offerings to our customers. So I think it's a little bit of a different model in that the stores aren't going anywhere. I think that's something we can take to the bank. We continue to see the need, even through the pandemic, for folks to shop in stores and find better ways to access products. What digital transformation is giving us is more avenues to our customers, more ways to make our products accessible, different methods to get them to a customer's door, and really leveraging digital capabilities to be able to do that in a more seamless fashion benefits both the customer and I think the Kroger business as well.
Tracy, I do see there's a question. I thought knowing that banking came up, I'd go ahead and ask it. The question was, what is the forecast for the future of digital-only banks and those strengths and weaknesses within that? So I think both Jeff, you and Rick kind of mentioned the banking side. Any thoughts on that forecast of digital-only banks?
Yeah, I think I'll preface that by saying I'm a baby banker. I've been with the bank for a year, so I feel like I'm still learning banking. The future of digital-only banks, I think it obviously is going to continue to grow. I would lump in as well, though, banks that may, companies and services that are not necessarily full banks but compete for a portion of the bank business. It can definitely be a death by 1,000 cuts. I think of some of the innovative lenders around for the personal loan space, and even auto loans and secured loans. There's a lot of great stuff happening there. I think the one thing that's to use Jen's phrase, I love that she used "take it to the bank" because I want people to take things to the bank. But the one thing that I think you can take to the bank regarding the banking industry is this is just going to accelerate the consolidation of banks and merger and those kinds of activities. It's been going on for quite a while, but I think we've in some ways trained our customers that they need access to a physical branch less and less. In other ways, though, one of the things I hear consistently about things like the PPP loan process is it was really nice to have a human to talk you through those things in a crisis situation. So I think we will see certainly growth of digital banks and digital lenders accelerate, but I think the human element's still always going to be there.
I think it's an opportunity in the banking industry specifically to become even more sticky with your customer, right? Because there's now a set of transactions I can do digitally, and there's still going to be, like kind of Jeff mentioned, that the opportunity to come into the bank and have a conversation. And what I see happening, even with my own relationships with my bank, and I was one of these early adopters of a company called NetBank. So NetBank was around in the 90s, it was like this first really online bank. I think Origin and Abayan, they no longer exist. Like if you search for them now, you'll get a 404 error. But what I find now, like with the Fifth Third that we use, where I do my banking personally, is when they contact me, it's a very specific thing. Like it's not, hey, it's more driven towards, hey, here's a unique need that I may have that requires a conversation. I'm not ordering checks anymore or trying to figure out what my deposit statement meant or what is all that transactional stuff that I think your typical teller or bank agent was dealing with before is now not, because that's been taken off their plate and they're able to have deeper conversations and potentially sell more, which I think is really what I think is the opportunity for digital in general. Is back to the call center example. If I can get that call center person to stop having to deal with the mundane, maybe they're now freed up to talk about relationship things, and they're freed up to talk about how to build the relationship or build the client in terms of what other products and services we can offer. Oh, I didn't realize you were having that problem, sir. Here's an opportunity that we can maybe sell or talk about something we offer that maybe you don't even know about, because the typical stuff's been taken care of. I think that's really the value of digital in really any industry, is creating better revenue opportunities and better, traction, if you will, or stickiness, whatever phrase you want to use with your customer.
What we'd like to do is jump a little bit into technical debt. And as you think about kind of digital transformation, there may be instances where you've inherited technical debt within your organization. I'd like to kind of get your perspectives of how have you handled kind of that technical debt that you did inherit, and then also what processes are you using to determine how to kind of manage it going forward? Rick, you want to start us off?
Yeah, so in the previous role, the technical debt situation we were in was pretty bleak. I called them P1 Mondays. And we'd have, changes that were going on the week before that resulted in, as soon as the storefronts were opening on the East Coast, P1s were coming in. And it was a combination, not just of the tech debt, but the actual software delivery process we were using to introduce change. And so we had to really change fundamentally how we did software delivery and really introducing Agile at that point. And then bifurcating the organization from an IT perspective. I had to be very intentional about, here's the team running current things, and here's the team who's going to change the model in terms of how we do things going forward. And we partnered with companies like CBTS and even Accenture and a few other firms around town to really bring in the right talent at the right time to help us in that transition. But for me personally, in that experience with this pretty bad technical debt situation, we had to separate our mindsets because we couldn't have two groups of people trying to do something that were really completely different forms of thinking, different contexts at the same time. It was impossible. So that was one of the things that we were able to achieve. We got a lot of, for us, it was getting board buy-in that IT was going to go up before it could go down, right? We had to invest and get the right people at the right places at the right time, which is going to be additional cost, with this promise of what we were going to be in from an efficiency perspective. And then we ran very specific plays. Like we looked at, we created rules for ourselves, for example, in the software delivery process, where everything had to be cloud first. We adopted AWS pretty strongly. We set up an automation team from a testing automation perspective. I would strongly encourage anybody who's doing a lot of software dev practices today, you've got to have automation in the testing. And that was one of the very first investments we made. So what that gave us was the ability to make change quickly, and make sure that change was going to work. Really addressing that P1 issue I was mentioning before. And then we had another team focusing on the current assets that we had in the environment and what should be moved to AWS, what should be sunset, what should be refactored. We had a whole other group of people who were focusing on the current tech debt and what that looked like going forward from a cloud perspective. But it was a very clear strategy around cloud first, get that up and running, and then look at the legacy and figure out what makes sense and what's going to move forward.
Thank you, Rick. Jen?
Yeah, Rick, I think that's a great perspective, and love the approach of having disciplined teams helping to drive technical debt out. For Kroger, I think we're definitely in a similar situation where we've got the typical incurred debt, right? So systems change over time, enhancements are made, you have the backlog piling up. But I also think we're in a unique position that as we choose to be more of an e-com player, as we add modalities, as we add capabilities, we're also making strategic decisions to select additional technical debt. So if we think about migration to cloud, for an enterprise as large as we are, we can't complete that migration overnight. You can't even complete it over a quarter. And so when I say strategically selecting our technical debt, when we think about moving over specific services or applications to the cloud, we have to really think through the implications of that, all the connection points, and what does that mean for potential future technical debt or rework. And so there are a lot of factors that go into those decisions. Obviously, it would be great if we could, I always use the copy paste and move everything over all at once, but knowing how intricate the systems are and how much really goes into the platforms today, I think we have had to be pretty strategic in the additional technical debt we've taken on. I think the good thing about this is it does cause us to reassess our ways of working, as Rick mentioned. So we are a product-led organization for Kroger Technology and Digital. As Jeff mentioned, 2.5 years ago, I think there were 6 product managers in digital, and they ran the entire website, and that was sort of the full remit there. Now today, we're north of 150 product managers, each running their own product teams. We cover applications, we cover the entire customer experience. We even help lead supply chain and merchandising efforts to make sure that product-centric mentality is really there. But when I say product-centric or product-led, it doesn't mean that you've got someone with a product management title making all the decisions. It really is about an approach we use called the 3-legged stool, which means there's a product manager, product designer, an engineering or technical counterpart in all decisions. And what this has done for us is really help evaluate our priorities and be very clear on what objectives we're setting. Now, technical debt comes into the picture because obviously we don't want that to amass over time. So every quarter when we're talking about the items we want to tackle, what objectives we're going to go after in a quarter, the technical piece is absolutely a part of the conversation. Even at our most senior levels, we have objectives around technical pieces, whether that's architecture, tackling technical debt, improving SLAs. So it really is a balanced equation if you think about who gets to weigh in and how we consider the decisions we make. I think it's really encouraging to see that balance of customer enhancements and new experiences all being discussed in the same framework and the same discussions as technical debt.
Jeff?
Yeah, I think I would echo a lot of things that Rick and Jen mentioned. Rick, your emphasis on test automation is something we're going through right now at First Financial and building our muscle there. And Jen, what you mentioned about the role of products, I think is spot on. I was one of those original digital product managers at Kroger, so I think there's probably a lot of technical debt that can be blamed on me. So you're welcome. But I think a few lessons that I've learned as a digital product manager. One is you really need a system to keep track of your technical debt. Those decisions that you've made for the short term that were intentional. And if there's not something going in your backlog as a digital product manager to offset that so you don't lose track of it, even if it's something you're going to tackle a year or two from now, you're really doing yourself a disservice. And then the other piece I think I would echo is around you get what you measure, right? And Kroger adopted the OKR, objective key results methodology that Jen mentioned. That's one technique, but I think the big takeaway for me was if you're not making setting the clear objectives around performance, availability, and those kinds of metrics, then your default will be focusing on what new shiny things have we delivered to customers, and then your focus is so entirely on the roadmap that you're not going to be balanced. So those would be my two takeaways.
So we've got actually a couple questions. Jen, you mentioned infrastructure assets. The question is, does any of the other folks have robust planning, deployment, and control around ITAM and SAM? Rick, you want to start us off?
Yeah, so we just actually made an investment at Paycor in a ServiceNow module that deal with SAM. One of the realities of Paycor, starting as really a payroll processing company, and then offered an HCM platform in the SaaS layer down the road, is we have a fairly large SQL environment in our data center that runs payroll for 40,000 employees, 40,000 customers. So that, with the also growth of software as a service tools and platform as a service tools, the tech decisions weren't made always centrally within Paycor. So various groups have been able to go out and purchase a product that they wanted to use to solve a business problem. So actually having not just the infrastructure under control, but the software assets under control, especially in this SaaS world that we live in now, just answering basic questions. Hey, we're getting billed for 30 licenses. Are we actually using 30 licenses, right? So it's a really important topic, I think, for companies these days. The short answer for me is we're in the beginning stages of this. We're going to use the ServiceNow tools to help us get governance around this. We've already stood up, a software review process. We've already stood up a conversation with finance to connect the finance budget spend with what the software request is. So I'm kind of big on not trying to get in front of blocking those things, but making sure that we understand the investment, and then using a tool like that ServiceNow offers to help us kind of keep a catalog of it. But I've never been at a place that was really good at it. It takes a discipline all by itself, and sometimes I think it's, at least in my experience, it's been hard to justify the cost. But I think in the world we're living in now, which is more software as a service, platform as a service, your key customers and your key partners are going to want to do these things on their own, and that's what some of these platforms offer. You're going to need that discipline.
Jeff, any additional thoughts on ITAM and SAM? Hey, Jeff, I think we're...
Yeah, sorry.
Oh, no, you're okay.
I think I would agree with Rick's assessment that I haven't been at a place that's really doing a great job at it. It's just something we're going to have to get better at. I would, I would just throw out there, the complexity level in an organization that, even the First Financial, but especially at Kroger, there were systems that were designed in the 60s and 70s that had 200 plus systems depending and layer it on top of them. So it is a very complex environment, but definitely something that needs to be addressed.
Jen, any additional thoughts?
No, I think the guys have covered it.
We did have another question that was sent over, and maybe just provide some additional examples of kind of where you have technical debt internally, or maybe even how you have defined it within your organization of what technical debt is. Rick, you want to go ahead and start us off?
I think technical debt, it's a good question. I think I wouldn't maybe necessarily make the argument that, hey, I'm running a physical asset and therefore I have technical debt. And I don't think that's probably appropriate. I would say it's technical debt that I would say any software or infrastructure that's not being maintained and is not being connected to the service you're providing would be debt. So if you've got a Windows machine that's not getting patched, or you've got, a SQL environment that needs the operating system's way behind, that's debt. If you haven't built the process in, I think Jen mentioned it, where you're maintaining your technology as part of the use of it, then it's debt, right? I think it's probably how I would define it.
Jen?
Yeah, I think I agree with what Rick shared. I think the build I would have there is, as we're making decisions about future enhancements, new functionality and features, right? A large portion of our technical debt is really in how that's architected initially, right? So if we think about the appropriate architecture, how things connect, all the services at play, I think we incur a fair amount of technical debt by those decisions. Knowing that our enterprise is largely store-based, we've obviously had a fair amount of technical debt moving from in-store to being able to support an e-commerce business. And so I think whether we knew going in, right, 125 years ago, that we would have that level of technical debt is a very different question. But now we try and be very intentional about every decision. Or, if we're adding another data vendor, if we're releasing a new application, like what is the impact to the existing environment? How does it fit into the architecture? And trying to be a little bit more diligent with those decisions as we look forward.
Jeff, any additional thoughts?
Yeah, I guess I might put a little bit of a positive spin on technical debt, because I think back to some of the decisions. To me, I view technical debt, the same way I view personal financial debt. It's a useful tool in some ways. I wouldn't be sitting in this wonderful basement if I didn't have a mortgage. But abused and not tracked, it could be obviously very, very bad. I think about an example of debt that was taken on. I wouldn't really call this technical. I'd really call this data. That when my very first job in Kroger Digital was to figure out, hey, how do we build an e-commerce catalog for Kroger, and every single system that housed that kind of item data was not meant to be for e-commerce, and it was thought up, decades ago. And it really was never meant to be customer facing. And so we had to make some decisions to get our e-commerce business stood up. And ultimately, within a couple of years, we had to replace absolutely everything that we built, which sounds wasteful. But if we had not made that decision at that time to build what was necessary, knowing that we'd have to replace it, and that we were essentially incurring debt, I'm positive Kroger wouldn't be where it is today, and would not have a viable e-com business if we'd even waited a year. So I think the risks with the debt is in the mismanagement or the lack of oversight and transparency on it.
Jeff, I love the positive spin, and I also think you alluded to this in a previous comment. It's so much about the visibility and the prioritization, right? Positive or negative, knowing it exists and being able to work through it is probably the biggest emphasis I could put forth on like how you deal with technical debt.
What we'd like to do is ask maybe an example or a case study that you guys have been involved with individually, either current employer or maybe previous, on a digital transformation initiative. And kind of talk through that, kind of talk a little bit about what did you uncover, talk about, even to the technical debt components, how did you overcome some of the challenges that you experienced on the transformation that you embarked upon. Jen, can you start us off?
Sure. So before this role with Kroger, I actually led our digital personalization efforts. And so the interesting thing when you think about personalization and online shopping, it seems like it should be a relatively easy problem to solve, right? I buy certain products, that generally means I'm interested in products that are like that. But when you dig down past the surface, there's actually a lot that goes into personalization. And for Kroger, I think it's as much about meeting an individual customer's needs as it is trying to replicate that in-store experience. We have so many shoppers that they know the cashier, they're friends with the florist, they really enjoy that interaction in store. And so if we think about digital transformation, that's not an easy thing to replicate. You really have to think beyond the individual transaction, the items being added to the basket, and what is that customer really seeking out. And so from a personalization perspective, still a problem we're I think, solving through and improving with each new iteration. But we started with the basics, right? What is my shopping history? What are the things I'm most likely to buy because of past purchases? And then started to enhance from there. And so we've absolutely incurred some technical debt along the way. We relied heavily on our data science capabilities and thinking through all the different possible ways we could slice and dice a customer's purchase history. Really had to make some intentional and maybe unknown decisions along the way. Our next iteration really netted out that it's beyond just what a customer's purchased and trying to make informed recommendations. So if you think about going through a store, depending on what type of shopper you are, you might be someone who walks the aisles, you know what's on your list, but occasionally you'll browse and pick up a new product. If we think about that in a digital sense, it's much harder to replicate, and it's even harder to get a customer to transact on new products. So personalization actually allows us to drive innovative ways for customers to discover products, for them to see recipes that those products could be a part of, and really help to enhance the online shopping experience. I think we've been very fortunate that Kroger customers are probably the best shoppers out there. And so we get lots of great feedback, both solicited and non-solicited, about how to enhance our personalization services. So it goes beyond just providing someone a coupon, digital or paper. It goes beyond being able to recommend products based on things you've purchased, and it really digs into that discovery mode. How do we help you find what you're looking for, even if you didn't know you were looking for it? I think where we're headed next in terms of personalization is really about adding in additional services and offerings from Kroger and our partners even. So my role today is with our health and wellness teams and really enhancing our customer experience. If you think about all of our health and wellness offerings, it's everything from our little clinics to our pharmacies. So all the enhancements, personalization, and really a digital transformation can make along the way. It's helping you fill your prescriptions. It's getting you medicine on time. It's reminding you of your flu shot and really personalizing that experience throughout. So it's not just about grocery buying. It can be about so much more. And I think what digital has allowed us to really bring forth with this is those services, those offerings, that experience can feel very holistic, whether you're shopping online or in store, because we really do use it as the connective tissue for a lot of those different experiences.
Jeff, do you want to go next for us?
Yeah. So I guess I can talk a little bit about an example of tech debt. And as you can imagine, I would love to have some first financial examples, but they're not quite as exciting as the ones I built up over 7 years at Kroger. When we were starting this whole e-commerce gig, this whole clickless thing, I mentioned, our systems and our data had nothing that I would present to a customer. I think we've all looked at our receipts from Kroger and seen these, abbreviations and like, what the heck did I just buy? I have no idea, right? That was the extent of the product title or description that we had back when we started this. That's not acceptable. And then we really had no images of our products to speak of. And so in that case, it wasn't even a case of there's an option to, remediate this in the existing systems. It was, let's stand up something parallel that'll meet our immediate needs, and then we'll figure it out later. how to converge these two things. I will say it took the better part of 5 years to get to a place where those legacy systems were the source of truth for e-commerce data, which so this I guess the learning from that is don't underestimate how much kicking the can down the road is, how long that's actually going to take, as well as some of the decisions that you made will in some cases live much longer than you expected. I think specifically right before we were about to launch our first clickless store, we realized, hey, we've got images for bread and Tide. We don't have any images of our deli meats, which is something customers buy a lot of from the deli counter. So myself and 2 people from our marketing team went to that first store where we were setting up the clicklist operation, set up a photo booth in a under construction area of that store, and just started taking pictures as best we could of deli meats. As of a month ago, I could still find some of those pictures that were intended to just, be out there because we had to have something. Those still exist. So, that was I think that's a lesson to really track your, your technical debt. I think the other thing that I learned through that experience, I mentioned it took about 5 years or so to really get to where we wanted to be from a technology standpoint with one system. The other lesson I would have is don't underestimate how deep you need to get and in understanding where your data comes from. I had heard of this mythical system for years that was essentially, as I mentioned, built on technology from the 60s. It took 5 years to finally get to it, but unfortunately, it was the underpinning of some of the other systems that we depended on. So it's I guess the lesson there was always be curious as to what's below the surface, because there can be some of those cheesy proverbial icebergs where you're some of that tech that is buried way deep.
One thing I would maybe add to the conversation is the human factor element. The example I would use is, we were running a SAP program at GE, implementing SAP on the engine shop floor, where we do maintenance, repair, and overhaul for GE engines, and in Brazil. And it was a plant of about 1,500 people. Probably 800 of them were folks on the floor turning wrenches. And in that process, it was all paper, right? Whatever they needed to do to the aircraft engine and the result of that repair, they looked at a paper document that gave them the work instructions. And we were moving all of that into SAP. And so that's the element of getting that data off the paper transposed correctly into SAP was a challenge for sure. But getting people to actually use the screen, the computer, the mouse, the keyboard to document what they were doing was a huge underestimate for us in terms of what the human transition was going to be to get people to do that and be happy about it. And so I think that's sometimes understated when we talk about changing human behavior when it comes to using digital tools or digital technology. The amount of energy took the leadership team within the plant itself to drive home that expectation, the training, the retraining, the work to get the average mechanic. And these are all, aircraft certified technicians. These are educated people, technical people, understood the product, understood what they needed to do. But to get them to transition into the SAP system, to do that was a huge undertaking, and the technology was well ready way before the human element was. And I've looked at that again, I would have gotten involved in the human element much sooner in that process. I think that's, I think we use the example of, I go to the deli, somebody mentioned I look at deli meat, well, I'm gonna look that on the screen. And understanding that and appreciating the fact that you're asking people to do something completely different than what they've done before is what I have found to be a pacing item in any digital transformation. The other example I would give is don't underestimate what it takes to get your own staff there. If you're a CIO or a technical leader of a team, getting your own IT organization to adopt these practices and these behaviors, I have found to be another critical path element. Specifically folks that are really the ones who manage the physical assets today. Because in a cloud world, there are no physical assets, right? They're virtual. So I got to take someone who's been maybe being paid and their expectation of managing a Windows box. How do they do that in the virtual world? Or what does that job even look like in the virtual world? And what threat do they have? Do they feel themselves that now you're asking me to do something through a pane of glass that maybe I wasn't doing before? So I've found that as much energy in my own IT organization to get them to understand digital transformation and what their role is to make that happen is also a lot of work that needs to be planned for and accounted for. So to me, it's really all at the end of the day kind of about the human element and how do you get people from A to B.
So
Okay,
Rick, oh, go ahead, Jen. No, please.
Oh, I was just going to say, we spoke a little bit about this in our prep call, and I think one of the interesting points you made was digital transformation is never just digital, right? And I think so much of that is really either setting the tone from leadership or being really great at the storytelling aspect, so the rest of the business feels very engaged and very much a part of the journey.
Yeah, you bring up some great points, regarding the people side, and when you look at some of the definitions of digital transformation, they talk about software development, they talk about IT architecture, they talk about data and analytics, but bring up a great point regarding the people side of things. And so, Jen and Jeff would be interested in kind of additional perspectives on how you guys have managed the people side of the equation. You think about some of the digital transformation and kind of piggybacking on, kind of Rick and the work at GE and getting them, to move the ball forward from a people side.
Yeah, I think perspective I can add to what Rick shared is, and I alluded to it earlier, our framework at Kroger really around the objectives and key results is very important because it talks so much about the why we're doing something, the behavior we hope to drive. And I think what that's done is it's given us visibility across the organization around the goals we're setting and what really those goals will drive. So instead of just saying, we could set a goal to say we're going to migrate so many services to being cloud-based, and that in and of itself might provide some value. But if we take a step back and really look at what behavior we're trying to drive or what systems we're trying to sunset and what the benefit of that is, really structuring the objective around that aspirational piece. So whether that's lowering technical debt or an objective around improving our efficiency and our uptime to customers, making sure our services are reliable. I think what that does is it communicates the why behind decisions to a broader audience. And that way, when we're looking at other groups that either need to contribute to that work or other groups that might just need to have visibility, it's less about the actual execution piece and more about that storytelling aspect I mentioned. I think it's much easier to get folks bought in when you start with the why and make that very clear in the objectives you set.
Jeff?
Yeah, on the people side, that's something we're going through at First Financial. Our digital/bank transformation is maybe a little bit older than a year, 18 months or so. More and more I'm finding myself, when I look at what's in their way, in the way of us delivering, it's not the digital staffing, it's staffing in other areas. We're certainly in IT, but in security, we've got to look at what load are we creating for other departments, and if the answer is we're moving without them, that's the wrong answer. Those areas where growth in digital has caused load for us, IT security, marketing. The marketing partnerships certainly critical for us as we're launching more and more features. It does us no good if people aren't educated on them. And that's on top of areas within digital where we've had to shore up, which analytics and UX have been our focus lately. But if you ask me, which actually I was asked this question, where do you want to invest headcount in 2021? As much as I'd love to have more headcount on my team, it's been on those areas, because without ramping them up, you're not really optimizing.
As you think through the digital transformations that you guys have gone through, and the examples you gave, what would you do differently today? Jen, you want to start us off?
Sure. So my example was really around the personalization aspect, right? And trying to, as much as possible, replicate that in-store experience. If we were going to do it differently, I think I'd like to start with more of the customer input up front. So I think early on, we weren't as great about being product-led. We didn't have an awesome framework to test our theories. And so what we did is we spent a lot of time iterating and churning through what could be and what we thought we'd want to bring to life, sometimes missing the mark on customer expectations. So I think I know there are a few comments in the chat about click lists and our substitutions, and this is a great example of where personalization absolutely can improve and should drive those experiences. But we made the mistake of starting with what we thought should be versus what our customers wanted to see. Reality subs is a great example, right? As a customer, if you're in the store and you're buying yogurt, and you always get the Chobani vanilla non-fat yogurt and they're out, you're looking at the shelf and you can pick your own substitution, right? Personalization has the data, it has the customer preference to help replicate that online, but we haven't done a great job of pulling it forward, at least not initially. And so what we've seen is, our customers are very vocal about that. We've let them down, we've missed an opportunity. Our goal is always to surprise and delight. So I think if I could go back, it would really be to elicit that customer feedback up front, figure out where personalization should lead, and when it leads, what should that customer experience look like so that we're not wasting any opportunities.
Jeff?
Yeah, I think along the same lines, if you're not talking to customers, you may get lucky on a few things on your roadmap and build things, but you're not going to be successful for long. I ran across something on Twitter recently that talked about all the different things you have to watch out in digital transformations. And I won't bore you with all of them, but it was kind of a zoo animal themed. And one of them was the zebra. I don't know if you saw this. And it stood for the person in the room who, zebra stood for zero evidence, but really arrogant. And it gave me some flashbacks, heading off, those behaviors are enabled when the culture doesn't really believe in talking to customers and getting that evidence. So my learning from my time in digital is to squash those zero evidence but really arrogant tendencies, whether I observe them, culturally in others in the group or even in myself.
Rick?
I guess I think it's been mentioned already. I think the customer view should be driving what you're doing. That's easier said than done, I think, in many cases. There's a lot of people inside an organization who feels like they own that relationship. And so, getting a technical person or a digital person into that dialogue is probably harder than it sounds. So again, I feel like, my experiences have been that it's really your own inertia of your own organization is sometimes who you have to convince the most. That's the behavior that's got to change the most. I'll go back to the call center example we had going on in Paycor. People are going to go through this evolution of, well, today I answer all of those questions. So if you're going to build a bot that does that, then what's that mean for me? And the quicker we answer that question and we provide the future and we provide the value of the role going forward, the quicker we will make that transition. Because in fact, they'll help us do that even better. And I think that's the trick, is how do you have all of those conversations? If you're a call center like ours of 400, 500 people, you got to find a way to convince all 400 or 500 people, right? I think that's the trick to any type of transformation, but specifically this one, because the jobs are going to change. The roles of what people do and how they do it, whether you're selling something, supporting something, building something, are changing. And so I think the energy on that front is you got to double down on that as soon as you can.
We've got a pretty diverse group on the call and size of organization as well. How do you think digital transformation changes if you are a smaller company? Jeff, can you kick us off?
Yeah, I mean, just, I think my personal growth this past year has been a lot around getting competent and broader in my knowledge and understanding of topics where, in some cases in a larger organization, that's handled for me. The day-to-day conversations with info security, for example, that were happening between technical leads, architects, and info security at Kroger. I didn't really need to be involved or know too much about them unless there was a product-related decision that had to be made around it. I'm finding, in a small organization that doesn't have the same level of staffing, I need to be at least a little bit fluent in those things.
Jen?
Yeah, so before Kroger, I was with a startup, and I think we built websites for employee incentive and recognition. So really programs to help digitize rewarding people and training people and making sure our people, our most important asset, feel appreciated. And what I can say about the digital transformation there, we completed our migration from being hosted on-prem to cloud-based, and it was a really easy decision. There were 4 of us. We sat in a room. We said, "Are we going to do this?" Yeah. And by 2 weeks later, very small applications, right? It was completed. So nothing like what we're facing at Kroger today. But I will say, while the decisions might be quicker and even easier to a degree, the weight of those decisions feels much more significant. And so in that example where we completed our migration, none of us understood really what that meant. We didn't understand the policies on geo-redundancy. We didn't understand really what to do when there was an outage now that we were hosted in the cloud. And so I think it was very humbling to say, great, we completed this great digital transformation, and it does provide so much more to our customers in terms of uptime and really reliability of service. But from the support aspect, it was that same group of 4 or 5 in a room pointing fingers of who was on point for issue resolution. So I do think there are ups and downs. I think the gravity of those decisions feels much more real because it's shared amongst a smaller group.
Rick, anything else to add?
No, I think Jen probably said it really well. I think the smaller firm can move quicker, but they may not have the collective experience to deal with the scale. Yeah. And so that's sort of the plus side of a larger organization, right? I've got the ability to scale. If I didn't have that skill, I wouldn't have ever become big, right? So, but the downside is you've got an aircraft carrier you're trying to steer, and the downside of that is that. And then in a smaller company, it's almost the opposite issue. So I don't know if there's a right or wrong or a best place to put it in. I think it's really just understanding your strengths and weaknesses when you go through that, those types of efforts.
Yeah, one of the questions that we talked about when we were prepping was kind of managing that whole bimodal set of requirements, kind of lift and shift isn't necessarily the solution. So I have to support both the old and legacy, bring in the new and take out the old. Can you talk about how you have managed that internally your organizations?
Well, at my previous role at Access, I positioned the internal IT team towards the new as much as I possibly could and outsourced the legacy. You know, I mentioned CBTS before. We brought them in to look at the legacy tech debt and figure out what to do with it. And then position all the new things with the current team, right? You may not have that luxury, but I found that to be a good way to manage the transition for my own internal team, like, because they are all now immediately invested in the future. And so, you know, obviously had to rely on subject matter expertise in some regards to the old stuff when we had to make decisions about refactoring, but the strategy was very clear, right? I think if you can pull that off within your organization, at least the experience I had, that seemed to work pretty well for us. You know, that's how we thought about it in the old role when we were going through that transition.
Jeff?
Yeah, I think I would echo what Rick said. You know, I've been in situations where we didn't have a clear strategy, you know, and that's when you end up with, you know, systems that don't converge or eliminate your tech debt, you know, for 4 or 5 years. I've also been in situations where, you know, the strategy for migration was set up, you know, from the beginning, and that makes all the difference when you're very clear and intentional about, you know, this is why we're doing this for a short period of time, and this is how we're going to get out of it, versus, you know, a situation where, you know, we're going to build some new system without a plan to ever integrate it.
Jen?
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add there is our teams currently have the opposite approach of Rick's. I really like the idea of Rick's approach because I think to Rick's point, it helps teams have a very clear and intentional focus. But currently our policy for most of our teams is you write it, you maintain it. And the benefit to that is I think they're very invested in keeping that technical debt down, right? Making sure stories get played to address technical debt, making sure as we think about product enhancements, that's considered right along some of the migration work we need to do, some of the updates. And I think it really drives a mentality for the teams to be holistic in their approach. I won't say it's perfect by any means because to Rick's point, we don't have that dedicated focus. So it means that a migration or any sort of change really is a little bit slower because it's being considered against all other work.
Tracy, I actually fell behind on the questions, but I think it's probably worth maybe jumping into a few of the questions that came in earlier in the conversation. Do you happen to have those readily available?
I do. So one, I'm going to combine kind of two of them. Around tech debt, do you believe that it's considered in the original capital equipment request and approved by senior management? And is it just hardware and software, or are you also including the data and processes around the things that you're working on? So Rick, we'll start with you.
I think yes and no. I think in the software space, yes, because you're paying maintenance, right? You're paying for the upkeep for that software. It's a little bit easier to see. In the hardware, it's a little bit more difficult because if you're purchasing hardware that you're physically managing, then you've got probably an internal team or maybe a service you're providing to maintain that environment, patch it, keep it upgraded, all that stuff. It should be captured probably like in an OpEx line item, I would imagine. But I think what gets lost sometimes is the resources required to physically manage as well. So you may have a project where you're implementing hardware as a result of a new software that you're putting in place. You may have a headcount in that plan that is probably amortized against the asset itself, and over time that becomes an OpEx sunk cost in the out year, right? that's how that's how GE typically manage those things. In the cloud world, it's a little different story because you don't actually have physical assets and everything's more OpEx in that regard. So I think what I've seen as a good budget practice is, you're paying for engineering costs to manage that environment. That's more of an R&D function, which isn't necessarily SG&A, which is a little bit more difficult to justify in the finance world. So I think that's the upside of using cloud technology from a cost perspective. But I think the short answer is it just kind of depends. The data piece that you mentioned is a really good question. I haven't seen a good model for how you think about data controllership, data governance, managing that cost, other than people who are just trying to do it. I haven't seen a good model for how you talk about that as a cost.
Thanks. Jeff, any addition there?
Yeah, no, I really don't have much to add there. The question of, do you consider debt to include data and processes? I would add people to that as well. But I think from my standpoint, debt is any short-term decision you've made that you'll have to fix in the future. And yeah, data, people, processes is all part of that.
Great, thanks. Jen, yourself?
I think the only piece to add, Tracy, is regarding the level of sign off on the decision. I think that was a part of the question as well. And for us, it's really about the touch points, right? So is the decision contained within a team? If so, I think it's pretty evident that they can make that and execute against it. But it's when we start to get into multiple systems, cross-enterprise decisions, really having that collective leadership buy-in. We've learned very quickly that prioritization in one group does not always translate to prioritization in another. So I think that senior level visibility and even buy-in is very important, helping drive a more cohesive strategy.
Excellent point. Thanks for adding that. So along those similar lines, how do your organizations work into the planning cycles to try and minimize that long-term tech debt and convince the business to keep it at whatever the right level is? And we'll start with you.
Yeah, I think, so we do our objectives, OKRs, objectives and key results planning, both quarterly and annually. And the idea being the annual should really be the broader, more aspirational, what do we hope to achieve within the year? And then the quarterly taking a more manageable slice of that. I would say both levels have technical buy-in. They have technical objectives that are being driven. I think I mentioned earlier, they're considered right alongside the new experiences, features, functionality that we want to bring forward. And so it's really having that balanced view going into the year or the quarter. I think it's interesting because we've recently introduced a weekly inspection into progress against our objectives, where both leaders from our product org and our engineering team join the call. And it's very interesting to see like how dynamic those discussions can get quickly if we start falling behind on either set of objectives, or if there's a blocker, how quickly those bubble to the top, having those senior leaders participating. And I think the inspection has really been a great element for us to add in to help drive that visibility, but also to make sure we've got the right progress being tracked over time.
Awesome, thanks. Rick? Sorry for you all.
Tracy, what's the question again?
About are you proactively planning cycles to help minimize the long-term tech debt and convince the business how to keep that balance between the right level of tech debt versus moving forward, not let anyone side get too heavy?
Yeah, I think in the Paycor example, it's a little bit easier because we're a software company today. So the conversation around managing the software itself as debt is a little easier to talk about, incorporating your sprint planning. In my previous lives, I think back to the P1 example, we rang the bell, tech debt over and over again, right? The reason why this was happening is because of the debt of the environment itself. So I think sometimes using a crisis to your advantage to get some of the behavior to change. So I would, use, the fact maybe you're having operational issues on a fairly regular basis as an example of what happens when you don't manage your debt. And so going forward, how you change those things in terms of conversation is you just remind people of what it was like before when you weren't managing it, right? And so you have to account for it now, right? If you don't want to have P1s, then there's parts of our engineering team are spending time making the code more efficient than what they just released in the sprint maybe a month before, right? I think someone mentioned it. You're keeping track of those things through the course of your work, and you have, you take advantages of like the leadership team having roundtable discussions with people in your organization who are doing that type of work, and encouraging them, hey, don't be afraid to talk about what you're doing and why it matters, and why is that feature taking so long? Well, it's because I'm spending 30% of my time this week and making this other code that's already in production more efficient, right? Or whatever it may be. And just getting people to understand, I think, a little bit of what's going on behind the scenes at the detail level of what some of your engineering teams and your technical teams are working on, and how it's sort of like, hey, same thing of maintaining a machine on the shop floor. The machine goes down to be maintained, and that's a bad thing, right? But sometimes you have to take it down to maintain it. It's no different in the software world, where you've got to spend time on managing the asset. And that's how I think trying to find the terms that make sense to someone who may not be an IT person or a software person, and put it into their terms. So if you're managing a shop floor or a manufacturing facility, you put it in the terms of downtime of the maintenance of the machine itself, or what's going on in the shop floor, right? I think you try to find ways to communicate it in terms and language that your business partners would understand, or they can relate to.
I think that's a great point. One of our participants kind of forwarded that they've found a great example is that one of every 6 sprints is dedicated to debt elimination, to try and keep it as top of mind. And I kind of think that kind of matches your comment about quarterly reviews. You're kind of falling into that. So Jeff, anything to build off of there, particularly from your perspective financially?
Yeah, I think I would echo what Jen said, which is you need to make it part of your objectives and have everybody aligned to that. It's funny, the only thing I was going to add, and this is probably because we just, maybe we couldn't make it work, but other organizations could, just to watch out around the concept of dedicating and allocating special time for dealing with tech debt and maintainability of code. We had, we would plan high level quarters worth of work. So, 5 or 6 sprints. And we would say, all right, this last sprint, every 4th sprint, every 5th sprint is going to be no feature work. It's just going to be, things to eliminate tech debt. And what invariably would happen is we would have so much carryover that either the team themselves would decide to work on the carryover items themselves to achieve the quarter's objectives, or they'd get tremendous pressure to work on those things instead of tech debt. So if the organization can make it work where you've got dedicated cycles, dedicated sprints to it, that's great. I've seen it not work, but that may have been a function of the culture as well.
Great, thanks. So one of the questions that came through in the chat was the statement that digital transformation is pointless if you don't know and understand all of your processes, which is kind of what we were talking about a few minutes ago in terms of do you count those processes and that stuff in your tech debt costs? So what are your thoughts on that? And Jeff, we'll start with you, and then we'll move to Jen and then Rick.
Yeah, and it looks like this one was specifically guidance from specifically for the pharmaceutical industry. That statement that you need to understand all the processes in your business, I think the flip side is in practice, when you say that, that means delay in getting started. So, I think it's for me, it's interesting that it came from pharma, because I absolutely want that to be true for anything pharmaceutical related. If it's something, not to trivialize it, but if it's If it's something related to, you know, recommending to me a grocery product that I need to buy, I don't need that same level of fidelity. But I think that sounds fine. I would say though, know that the trade-off you're making there is probably a delay in getting started, and you know, the implications of that.
Yeah, Jeff, I couldn't agree more. When I read the comment, I immediately started thinking that sounds like a great excuse to not pick up the work today and run with it. But I do understand the importance of getting to know the processes, because I think that's really where you find out how and where the debt is coming to you, like what's causing it. So the idea of fixing the underlying issues but not fixing a broken system is obviously less than ideal for anyone. I think they have to occur in parallel. If you wait to understand all your processes, you'll never get running. If you spend all your time fixing the issues, you'll never fix the source.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it just kind of depends on the situation. You know, take for example, we have a module we implement for our customers for benefits. So a customer wants to, you know, use us for benefits administration. In the current process, cycle time, depending on the person who's implementing it on behalf, is anywhere from 6 days to 16 weeks in terms of how long it takes from contract signature to getting that product up and running, which for us is critical because that's when we recognize revenue after we implement the product, not at contract. So there's this huge demand, hey, digitize this, automate this, make this faster. Well, I put on my Six Sigma hat and go, there's something going wrong if it's 6 weeks or 16 and somewhere in the middle, right? So we actually are running a lean event inside that team to actually understand step by step what the process is, where's the cycle time, where's the waste, before I invest in technology to automate. Because my hunch tells me we've got really bad processes there, or inconsistent processes. And there's probably short-term gains we can have by taking some of the waste out, maybe getting that 6 to 16 week cycle time down to something maybe like, I don't know, 10 or whatever we can harmonize on. Now let's talk about automating that now that we have it under control. So I think it just depends on the situation you're in. If it's like no brainer, the example I used before, customers walking in and out the door because they don't have the right documents. I don't need to really process map that out or understand every step of the way. I just need a specific solution from the customer's perspective is how do I make that easier for them? So I think it really takes, you know, people on this call to understand what makes sense when and where. And that's frankly, I think why we're in the jobs we're in today is when do you apply it? How do you apply it? When does it take a step-by-step rigorous review? When does it just, this is a slam dunk, we can put something in now, if it's not perfect, great, we can iterate. I think it just kind of depends on the situation and that you're dealing with. Pharma, I tend to agree, you probably need to understand some of those procedures.
Great, thanks. So we're getting close to the end of our time. So this will be our last question for today. And I'll start with Jen, and then Jeff, if you can pick up, and Rick, and then we'll wrap up. How have you declared success? We've talked about how digital transformation is this ever evolving, ongoing thing. And, you know, Jeff referenced 5 years to get to some progress, 22, and we just referenced 6 weeks. So how do you declare success on what is kind of a continually moving target?
It's a great question. I think the answer is in milestones and small chunks, take it where you can get it, because the reality is a digital transformation probably is not a finite thing with a declared start and end. So Jeff alluded to some of the work that happened even prior to me joining Kroger that really was around moving us from store-based systems to supporting an e-commerce model. I think the benefit of that, we got to stand up a very real offering when the pandemic broke out, where we were able to quickly, in under 6 weeks, partner with Microsoft and FedEx to be able to offer an assortment of products that we could ship directly to customers' homes. They were dietitian curated, they came with recipes, so we were able to, like, in reality, put an entire week's worth of meals into a box and deliver it to someone's doorstep because that was what the need demanded. The reality is, though, if Jeff and teams hadn't been doing work in advance of that to really bring items forward, to improve our inventory, to give us better visibility of what was in the system, we never would have gotten there. And so I think so many wins in what the teams before us have done small wins and being able to serve a very real need in a pandemic. I'm looking forward to the next win of what do we do with that offering now? How do we start to serve food deserts? How do we use that offering to really combat hunger in the places we live? And so I think it is, what is that next win and how do we just keep trudging forward?
Who's next, Tracy?
Jeff, go ahead.
Yeah, you know, I think I go back to my earlier statement. I viewed that as a necessary tool, and so, you know, I love the concept that Jen had about milestones. It's you're going to have some milestones, you know, in your personal debt. Maybe when you pay off your mortgage, maybe when you pay off your credit card debt. But unless you plan on never using debt again, it's a, you know, quarter by quarter, however you want to measure it. It's an ongoing, it's always an ongoing balancing act. So I don't know that there's, I mean, certainly there's big milestones when you can retire a legacy system, for example. But it's an ongoing, you know, way of life. In terms of, you know, how you define success, I think we gave a lot of examples during this call. I think it's one of those things that, you know, it depends on, you know, in Rick's example I gave at the top of the call, it was, you know, eliminating and reducing all those P1s. That could be a very good success metric. But I guess, you know, I probably talked way too much, but yes, I would agree with Jen that it's an ongoing, take your milestones as they come, but it's a continual thing. It's not like there's no end to it.
I guess I would answer the same for similarly, like the P1 is a good example. We talked about that even inside the business that we were dealing with, where we couldn't implement changes of any kind without disrupting the business. So that's a clear metric. The second one was really big for Access was they couldn't actually launch new loan products. The loan management system that was having all the operational issues, there was not enough confidence in the current technical team or the technical team at the time to make changes. So we're stopping the business from evolving. So I think that's one of the things exciting about all our roles, right? In the kind of the evolution of IT is, you know, IT 20 years ago was managing boxes and you know, hardware and email systems and networks and, you know, the things that the business needed, but they weren't really being asked to help drive the business going forward, right? And I think that's very much changed for a lot of us in the last couple of decades. So back to the Access example, we measured product launches, right? And, you know, the year 3 of that job, of a 4-year job, we launched 3 products that year. They hadn't launched anything since like 2014. So being able to connect to what the business cares about is super, super important. You guys all know that. But I think for us, that was really when I really saw the power of cloud and transformation, that's when it kind of hit home for me, was that, you know, getting the right talent, using the right partners, some of them on the phone here, was really a big deal. And then measuring and being transparent about those measurements in terms of how you're moving the business forward. I think at the end of the day, that's really what we're all being asked to do in our various roles, but that was some of the key measurements for us.
Well, thank you very much. We're getting to the end here, so thank you to our panelists. I think we got a lot of great examples, you know, from GE and Kroger and First Financial and Access and Paycor, as well as some of the smaller companies that you've all worked for. I think hopefully everybody can walk away with some great insights and action items. Thank you to Steve for moderating and to Centric for being our sponsors and sticking with us throughout this year. We appreciate it. And we look forward to having all of you back with us in December. And we'll be sending out the recap link of this. So if you want to share it with some others, we hope to do that. So everybody go have a great day. And we look forward to seeing you again in the near future.